everyone, welcome back. Ready to dive into another historical mystery.
Always up for a good deep dive.
This time, we're tackling one of the biggest ones out there, the JFK assassination.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, I know, it's a big one, right? And we could spend weeks unpacking every detail and theory.
Right.
But I think the thing that always gets me is how this one event, this one day in Dallas, spawns so many, I don't know, like offshoots, you know?
Absolutely. It's like this fission moment in a way.
Yeah.
We had the assassination, tragic, of course, but then it's like everything that came after, all the theories, all the speculation, that's what's really come to define it for so many people.
Exactly. It's almost like we get caught up in the what ifs more than the what happened, you know?
Right. And it makes it even more important to really nail down that baseline reality before we go there.
Totally. So before we get lost in the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories.
Right. Which is tempting, don't get me wrong.
Always. But we're going to start with John F. Kennedy himself. War hero, youngest president ever elected. I mean, talk about a rock star, right?
Yeah, he really did capture the imagination of the country, didn't he? And the world, really.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just charisma. You know, he had this incredible backstory. Like, take his experience in World War II, the whole PT-109 incident.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that wasn't just a story. You know, it was this testament to his resilience under pressure. That really ended up defining his image.
And that image, that optimism, it was huge, especially in the early 60s, right? Like, we look back at Camelot and it all seems so, I don't know, kind of glamorous in a way. But the reality was, intense.
Intense is a good word for it.
You got the Cold War at its peak. I mean, think about the Cuban Missile Crisis. That wasn't some abstract threat. It was, the world was on edge, like literally holding its breath.
And on top of that, you've got the civil rights movement gaining momentum, challenging the status quo.
Which, to be fair, desperately needed challenging, but it put Kennedy in this incredibly difficult position. Oh, totally. He was trying to push for progress, but also appease those who were less than thrilled about it, to say the least.
Exactly. It was a tightrope walk, and it made him a target from multiple angles. You can't understand the assassination without understanding that pressure cooker he was navigating.
It's like he was caught in the middle of this, I don't know, this historical tug of war with the weight of the world on his shoulders.
Exactly. And that brings us to November 22, 1963.
A day that started like any other.
Well, I mean, a presidential trip to Dallas was a big deal.
Yeah.
But it was. You know, in terms of how it started, it seemed ordinary.
Routine, almost.
Yeah. And that's what makes what happens so jarring, you know?
I mean, you see the footage, the crowds lining the streets.
Excited to see the president and Jackie.
It was supposed to be this big show of support, especially with the election coming up.
Right, JFK needed Texas.
But in hindsight, it's almost like watching a movie, knowing what's coming, but not being able to stop it, you know?
Right.
And then, boom, shots fired, chaos.
And the world changes. It's wild, right? 1 minute things seem normal, the next, everything's different.
And then the investigation starts, and everyone wants answers, right? They want to know who killed JFK. But instead of clear answers, we got, Lee Harvey Oswald.
And that's where things go from tragic to, let's just say it gets complicated.
That's an understatement. I mean, you look at Oswald's past, former Marine, defects to the Soviet Union.
At the height of the Cold War, no less.
It's like something out of a spy novel. And then he comes back to the U.S., gets this job at the Texas School Book Depository.
Overlooking Dealey Plaza.
Of all the places. And then, bam, he's the prime suspect.
The ballistic evidence seemed to link him to it, at least on the surface, but then...
I'm a patsy.
Right. And just like that, you've got this whole other layer of mystery.
And before anyone can get a straight answer out of him, Jack Ruby.
Talk about adding fuel to the conspiracy fire.
Because really, what was Ruby's motive? Was it loyalty to the Kennedys? Or was he silencing Oswald to protect someone else?
It's still not clear, even after all these years. And that's the thing about this case. Those unanswered questions, they just breed more questions.
And theories. Don't forget the theories.
Oh, right. We've got theories for days.
It's the CIA being involved. I mean, that one's always felt big, right?
Well, it's not hard to see why people would go there. The CIA, especially back then, they were involved in some shady stuff.
To put it mildly.
And they weren't exactly thrilled with Kennedy after the Bay of Pigs fiasco, or how he handled the Cuban Missile Crisis, for that matter.
They thought he was too soft on communism.
Some of them, yeah. They wanted a harder line.
So what? They took matters into their own hands? I mean, that's...
It's a huge accusation. And to be fair, there's no smoking gun, no direct evidence linking the CIA to the assassination.
But it's hard to ignore their history, you know?
Right. And that's what makes these theories so compelling. You're not always dealing with hard facts. It's about connecting the dots, looking for patterns.
Which leads us to the mafia theory.
Ah, yes. Another classic.
Organized crime always seems to find its way into these things, doesn't it?
Well, in the 60s, the mob's reach was everywhere. Politics, law enforcement, they had their hooks in everything.
And they weren't afraid to use them.
No, they weren't.
Yeah.
And they saw Robert Kennedy, JFK's brother, as a direct threat.
He was going after them hard, right?
As Attorney General, he made it his mission to dismantle organized crime. And the mob, they don't forget that kind of thing.
So they take out the president to get back at his brother. Bold move.
Ruthless, more like.
Yeah.
And when you factor in Jack Ruby, his mob ties.
And the fact that he just happened to silence Oswald before he could say anything more.
It starts to feel a little too convenient, doesn't it?
Like something out of a movie.
Exactly. And that's the thing about the mafia theory. It's got all the elements of a classic Hollywood thriller.
But even with all that, there's this other theory, the one about Lyndon B. Johnson, that always kind of gives me chills.
LBJ. Yeah, that one's a bit unsettling, isn't it?
It hits different when you're talking about someone who's a heartbeat away from the presidency.
Right. Because it makes you question, what did Johnson know? And what, if anything, did he do to encourage what happened?
I mean, we're talking about a potential power grab at the highest level.
It's definitely a theory that's hard to shake off completely, especially when you consider LBJ's personality, his ambition.
And those rumors about shady dealings in Texas politics.
Exactly. It all kind of adds up to this cloud of suspicion that hangs over everything.
But even with all these theories, even with the CIA and the mafia, there's something about the grassy knoll.
Oh, yeah. The grassy knoll.
Like, that's the image that always comes to mind. The multiple gunmen, the idea that Oswald wasn't alone.
It's become this iconic symbol of the assassination, hasn't it?
And it's fueled by those eyewitness accounts, the ones who said the shots came from a different direction.
Right. And then there's the Zapruder film.
Oh, man, that film. It's like everyone's seen it, and yet it only raises more questions, you know?
It's both the best evidence we have and the most frustrating because it's grainy, it's shaky.
And it's open to interpretation.
Exactly. Like, what about the Umbrella Man?
Oh, yeah. The guy with the umbrella on a sunny day.
For years, people thought he must be signaling the assassins or something.
Turns out he was just protesting Joseph Kennedy's actions during World War II.
Talk about a letdown, right?
Yeah.
But it just goes to show, in the context of the JFK assassination, even the smallest details can take on this. Oversized significance.
It's like everyone wants to find meaning in the chaos, you know? It's like we try to find a reason, some explanation, even if it takes us down some pretty wild paths. But we can't forget about, you know, the official story, right? What the Warren Commission concluded after, what was it, like a year of investigations?
Yeah, almost a year.
Yeah.
And their conclusion, after all that, was pretty straightforward. Lee Harvey Oswald, acting alone.
One guy, one rifle.
One tragic but ultimately explainable event.
Except a lot of people didn't buy it, right?
Right. I mean, the Warren Report, it's been controversial from day one. Too many unanswered questions, too many loose ends. Well, the most famous one is probably the magic bullet theory. You've heard of that one, right?
Oh, yeah. The bullet that, like, made a U-turn.
Well, not quite a U-turn, but
yeah.
Imagine this. One bullet, fired from Oswald's position, supposedly went through Kennedy's neck, then hit Governor Connolly, who was sitting in front of him, and then...
And then what?
And then it wound up in pretty good condition, relatively speaking.
Okay, yeah. That's a lot for one bullet to do.
Right. And the physics of it, the trajectory, it's been debated endlessly. And that's just one piece of the puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
You've also got the eyewitness accounts, which, well, they don't always line up.
People remember things differently, especially in chaotic situations.
Exactly. And then there are questions about the autopsy itself, how it was handled, whether all the evidence... Well, let's just say there are some who believe things weren't handled as carefully as they should have been.
So what are we supposed to believe?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, we've got all this evidence, all these theories, but at the end of the day, we're still left with this feeling of uncertainty.
Like, we're trying to solve a puzzle, but half the pieces are missing.
Maybe that's the legacy of the JFK assassination. It wasn't just a tragedy. It was this rupture, this moment where our sense of, our sense of order was shattered.
And it makes sense, right? I mean, if it could happen to the president in broad daylight like that.
Exactly. It made people question everything.
Yeah.
The government, the media, the official narrative.
And it made people look for answers in some interesting places.
Which is how you end up with so many conspiracy theories.
Right. Because sometimes the truth, or at least the search for it, can be stranger than fiction.
And ultimately, maybe that's okay. Maybe the fact that we're still talking about this, debating it, trying to make sense of it,
Yeah.
maybe that's what keeps history alive.
Keeps us thinking,
Yeah,
keeps us asking questions.
exactly.
Well, there you have it. Another deep dive into the historical mystery vault. And who knows, maybe someday we'll have some definitive answers about the JFK assassination. But until then, we'll keep searching, keep questioning, and maybe, just maybe, we'll learn a little something about ourselves along the way.